everybody in AIM. I am excited to introduce you to our new speaker. Our speaker for this workshop is Lou Adler. Lou is the CEO of Performance-Based Hiring Learning Systems. He's an expert in the space of essentially how to transition into your career, but also how to determine when the right time is to switch jobs, which is our point of the workshop today. So I'm excited to introduce Lou. Lou, I would love if you could just share with me a little bit more about you and your background and some of the work that you do.
Hey, hi, Garrett. Hi, team, everybody. Yeah, my name is Lou Adler. I've been a recruiter for many, many years. Last 15 or 20 years, I've been training recruiters around the world and hiring managers how to hire people. What I find interesting is that most of them don't know how to do it, and most of them don't know how to do it well. Some of them do an extremely good job, though. So what I'd like to do today is just give you some insight as to what you need to do to get the job of choice and when you should actually start thinking about changing jobs. So that's the focus of today's topic. And delighted to be here with you, Garrett. And thank you for inviting me. Of
course. I'm so excited to have you. So I think before we jumped in about the advice about when is the right time to switch jobs or how to determine when that time is, can you tell me a little bit about your professional journey and the different paths you've taken to get to where you're at today?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Nobody would think that I should be doing what I'm doing. And sometimes I even think about it, that I was a stupid decision, but it's too late now. So my background, I've got an engineering background, got an MBA, worked in big companies in manufacturing and financial analysis, was running a manufacturing company when I was pretty young. And after about 10 years, and you think about when you should change jobs, well, it turned out that I had a group president who I just hated. I was actually the worst employee in the world on Thursdays. Took me Fridays to overcome it, but Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I was extraordinary. But Thursdays, he came down every Thursday and said how I screwed up the world. So I quit 4 or 5 times in the same year and was using some recruiters at that time. So I said, I think maybe I'll become a recruiter and look for another job. And that was really the whole purpose of becoming a recruiter. But then I realized that recruiting was just like making parts. And I had been in aerospace, I've been in consumer electronics at the time when handheld calculators just came out. I worked in automotive accessories and automotive manufacturing. So I just looked at it and said, if everybody does the right thing, you have the right spec, you keep people career moves, you focus on the right things, you actually can make it a business process. So that became everything I did, and that's the genesis of performance-based hiring. And I became a pretty good recruiter pretty quickly. The big thing I did, though, was I never used job descriptions. My first assignment was a plant manager making chrome wheels or custom wheels for hot rods. I just walked out in the plant and talked to the president and said, we'll find someone who can fix all these problems. Then there was a lot of problems. And I've never used a job description since then. I just asked the hiring manager, hey, what does this person need to do to be successful? And I'll find people who can do that work. And I would tell candidates looking for a job is, if you think you're going down a rabbit hole when you're interviewing an interviewer or a recruiter, just say to the recruiter, or the hiring manager, what does this person need to do to be successful? And I'll give you some examples of where I've done that kind of work. I guarantee you'll be put in the top half or top third of the peer group. You'll probably get an invitation back for interviewing just using that tip alone. But that's when I train candidates and recruiters and hiring managers on that same topic. Focus on the work that needs to be done, not the skills needed to do the work. If the person can do the work, he or she will have all the exact skills needed.
That's awesome. I love that perspective. That makes a lot of sense. One thing that's fascinating that I think is good to mention, because we do have quite a few engineers in our audience. I know that sometimes there's that stereotype that maybe as an engineer you might not be as adept socially, that typically you've got really strong hard skills, but I think sometimes I'll talk to students who are going in the field. They're like, hey, I've got a great GPA. I'm jumping into this career as like an aeronautical engineer or this electrical engineer. I don't need to focus on networking or building out my network because I've got all this intelligence. For you to transition from the engineering to the recruiting role, very sociable role, I would love to learn a little bit more about that, how you made that transition, and just to challenge the stereotype that maybe I have, or some of the things that I've heard.
Well, let me just say this. My first job was I was only an engineer for 2 or 3 years. Then I got an MBA, then I got into financial analysis and went on from there. And I did pretty well as an engineer. I mean, if you look at my back, you'd say, this guy's a good engineer. And I was a good engineer. My first job, and this was pretty cool, my first job, 22 years old, working on a guidance and control systems for a nuclear missile, which is pretty high-techy stuff. My boss said to me, the day I started, he said, I want you to explain these these 2 points to me. You have 3 days to figure it out. First, E equals MC squared, and you can't push on a rope. That's what he said. He said, I don't want you to do any work. I just want you to, and you can talk to anybody you want. I want you to figure out what that means. Well, obviously, I thought it was some E equals MC squared is pretty easy. Any techie can figure that out in minutes. That wasn't actually the point of the question, though. And you can't push on a rope, I thought initially was some physical problem. So that's where I identified it. So 2 days later, I said, I got the answer. And he said, you're wrong. Go back and do it again. So then I started talking to everybody in the team. And I realized what he meant by you can't push on a rope and the E equals MC squared. Yes, there are certain problems that are technical and you have to figure them out. But you have to convince others to do it. And you can't get them to do it by pushing on a rope. You have to work with the team, collaborate with the team, understand their issues, and work collaboratively to get the job done. Now, you can call those soft skills. I call them non-technical skills. Collaborating with people, understanding how to put product specs together, how to get stuff done on time and on budget, how to convince a whole team that they've got to work together rather than finger point and make the job done. That was what I learned the first week as an engineer, and I haven't lost that over 55 years later.
That's amazing. That makes a lot of sense. So my next question is, I guess for you, when it comes to your work and motivating yourself, as well as for anybody else in the audience who's thinking themselves, well, how do I determine what motivates me most? How do I determine when, like, is the job I'm currently working at, is that motivating to me? And when is the right time to switch jobs in terms of how do I assess my own motivators and the things that I should be looking for in a career or in the type of work that I want to pursue?
That's an interesting question. Now, this quick answer is, if you like to do the work, just because you stay late and you usually get into a state of flow, I want to do this work, and you nothing will bother you. You'll just work 24/7. So there's certainly this intrinsic motivation to do the job because you just like the work. But now I'm going to go back again 50 years ago to the first job I had. And I think this is interesting. It was high-techy stuff for a 22-year-old working on feedback guidance control systems. Literally, that's what it was for rockets, rocket ships. I thought the job was pretty cool as a 22-year-old. The guys I was working with, all guys at the time, thought the job sucked. And they would come in at 8 and they'd leave at 4:42, which was the odd hours at a 42-minute lunch. Pretty weird, but that's what aerospace was like. I got to know these people over a year. They had just been taken off the lunar landing project, put a man on the moon. My company was working on the command module that went around the moon, and they dropped the little ship down onto the moon. These guys worked for 5 years, 24/7 straight, didn't want to take a vacation, loved the job, didn't even want to go home. Same exact work, but the mission was motivating. They loved it. The same exact work with a crappy mission, it's demotivating. So there's two things. Do you like to do the work itself because you just like to do this kind of design work or analytical work or whatever it is, or make sales or whatever it is? But there's also a bigger component. What's the mission? And does that tie to the company mission? Does it tie to the product line? Does it tie to the company strategy? Is it just working with the group of people you want? Is just a great hiring manager? So all of those factors determine motivation. And you can't just make a simple rule and say, this is it, I've got to change jobs. You got to understand what's motivating you, what do you want out of your life and your career, and those things make you happy. So it's not necessarily a simple formula, but it's an important formula to get regardless.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That makes me think of some of the research we've done in mentorship when we match mentees and mentors together.
Absolutely.
One of the things that we've observed was that this thing called work orientation, how you view your work, has a higher correlation to successful mentorship than just matching on career interest alone. And by work orientation, I mean how you view your work. What I mean by that is some people view the work as a job, some people view the work as a career, and some people view the work as a calling. And a job is you're motivated by work-life balance. A career is you're motivated by moving up the ladder and getting promoted. And the calling is where you're motivated by your personal and professional mission being alignment. And yeah, when we started matching based on work orientation, we saw much greater success in the mentorships we facilitated. So it sounds very much in line with what you're saying of understanding your motivations. People's motivators and the things that are going on at their work can absolutely change depending on the tasks that they're working on and their age or the things that are going on in their life.
Absolutely, makes perfect sense. No, I like that comparison. I wouldn't have thought of it, but it certainly makes logical sense.
Yeah, so I think what I would love to know is just on a baseline, because you've been doing this for a little over what, it was like 40 years now.
I go there.
Why do people switch jobs? Why do people switch careers? What,
Well,
or rather, why do people do it, and what are good reasons and what are bad reasons?
okay, so let me kind of restate, let me kind of go back a little bit in history as I then go forward. 25 years ago, it was hard to change jobs. There were no job boards, no internet, no LinkedIn. It was, you got to look in a newspaper to change jobs. So when you got aggravated at work, a bad day at the office, and if it was permanent, you would say, I got to take the effort. I got to look for a job. I got to send resumes. I got to go to the mailbox, post it, and do that work. And it was hard work. Even finding it was hard work. So you didn't change jobs in the pre-90s, say mid-90s, when job boards started coming out. You didn't change jobs superficially. Now, with the birth of the internet and even accelerating, people change jobs nilly-willy. I have a bad day at the office. They look for a couple of jobs that afternoon. If they're good, now you got to meet all the algorithms of how that was found on the internet, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're good, you'll get a job and you'll get connected by a recruiter in a couple of days. It might, but then you'll take a decision on a very short-term basis because of frustration. 25 years ago, yeah, maybe you sucked it up. It took me a year to change jobs. I knew it was going to be tough to change jobs because I hated my boss. And Thursdays, literally 4 Thursdays of the month, I was a miserable SOB, terrible worker. Friday, I kind of recovered, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's the difference. Are you changing jobs for short-term reasons or long-term reasons? And this is a grid that I tell candidates is, you've got to kind of look at it. So when I ask candidates questions, so why'd you change it? So I'd ask Garrett, why'd you change jobs? Why'd you go from company A to company B? And you would say, I changed it because I didn't know career motivation. And you come up with some BS about that. And I said, well, did you get what you wanted out of company B? You say, no, they misled me and they didn't promise me this and they didn't do that. And I said, okay, why'd you go from company B to company C? And you say, for career growth and all this. And did you get what you wanted out of company C? No, they misled me in that. And I said, that's a bunch of hokum. The person took jobs for short-term reasons. They didn't take them for long-term career reasons. And that's why, and I think companies have made that easier to take it. You have the right skills. Hey, we'll hire you today. We'll give you this much money. So you take short-term reasons, what I call it, what you get on day one. Too many people decide to take a job for what they get on day one. The salary, the title, the location, and the company name. Not what they're going to be doing and becoming in year one and beyond. And they get seduced to that. Recruiters even scale them. Hey, Garrett, you're making this much money? Fine. You can't take this job because you're making too much or too little. So people filter candidates on items that are negotiable. They filter people on the compensation. They filter people on the title. They filter, and candidates do the same thing. I don't want that job. I'm not interested. It's too much money, not enough money. Well, too much money. Nobody would filter that one out. But there's a lot of short-term thinking even to engage in the conversation. I said, how can you negotiate compensation before the person even knows the job? But we do it. Well, that's because they don't know what the job is. So what I tell candidates, when I call a candidate up, I make this statement. I said, this is the question I ask when I train recruiters. Would you be open to explore a situation if it were clearly superior to what you're doing today? It's a question. Would you open to talk about something that was better than what you're doing today? And this is passive. Obviously, active candidates would say, of course. Passive candidates would say, well, maybe, but what's the compensation? And I then say, it doesn't matter what the compensation is. Let's see if it's a career move first. And they say, what's a career move? And I say, I've got to give you a 30% non-monetary increase. That consists of job stretch, meaning a bigger job, job impact, meaning a more important job, a mix of more satisfying work, and continuing long-term growth. That's going to take some time to get to that. Let's just see if we can get there. So I tell recruiters, hiring managers, and candidates alike, that's the decision to make. Is it going to be long-term? I then, before I make an offer to someone, let's assume it's 2 to 3 weeks later, and I talk to the candidate, and I say to the candidate this question: forget the money. Do you want this job? Tell me why. And they all say, I want it. I said, but if they can't repeat back to 30% intrinsically, bigger team, more money, bigger team, more satisfaction, I'm doing this work instead of that work, I can see the growth rate. If they haven't done their due diligence, that job will be a mistake. And that's the point that I tell everybody. I don't care if you're actively looking or passively looking. If you don't get a 30% non-monetary increase, you're going to be disappointed when you take that job. Now, When you should take that job is a different issue, but the evaluation of how to make a decision to take job A or B or not change jobs at all is a difficult one. That's oftentimes companies don't even have the information to do it. But if you're a candidate who's aspiring for career growth, you must do it.
That's fascinating. You know, I bet from the company side, so if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like, are you, good reasons to make a job switch? Long-term projections and growth. Bad reasons are short-term. So short terms would be an increase, a modest bump in pay. That would be a short-term motivator, which, yeah, that doesn't seem like that would make much sense, but we see it all the time. People are like, oh, well, I'm going to go from this job where I'm making 50,000 to 55,000. Sure, there's a little bit of extra cash in your pocket, but if you're miserable, if it's not what you want to do or where you want to be, that's ultimately potentially even a step back and a big change in your work history. So I think that perspective you made makes a ton of sense, because if you're only changing based on the job, or based on the pay, then your time is a commodity. I mean, essentially that's it. Like your time, your willingness to switch jobs will change based on someone else's willingness to pay you more. And if you're a company, that's probably not a good thing, because then you're a race to the top. You're going to keep paying more until you end up figuring out a way to get to the internal candidates' drivers for what motivates them, whether that be the growth, or whether that be work-life balance, or whether that be a higher position. So Lou, I think that makes total sense.
Yeah, the idea is that I call it focus on what people get, which is day one, versus what they're going to do and become, which is the doing is what they do in a year, and the becoming is what could happen year after year. So when people, and I just look at people, as I say, changing jobs is a major decision. And do people make it superficially, or they make it, now everyone says they make it for the long term, but it's all hope and promises. It's, oh, the person said this and that. Well, you got to validate that. What are you going to be doing? And that's a tough question. But to me, if your career is important, now I can clearly see people making one mistake. When I ask people how they change jobs, I understand their decision-making criteria, and good people don't make long-term decisions using short-term data. And if they do it 2 or 3 times, as far as I'm concerned, you've made a couple of critical mistakes that are going to affect you for the next 5 or 10 years. Wow.
Wow. So, you know, I want to kind of maybe transition on the same topic, but for anybody who currently has a job, and anybody who's got a job currently right now, do you say, but they're contemplating potentially a switch. This could be internally, this could be externally. Do you suggest that they go to their current supervisor, their current boss, for guidance and advice and sharing their own career aspirations, to ask for their help, their boss's help, on what that transition might look like or how that might go?
Absolutely. So let me show a chart, if I can kind of pull this one off, because I think this is what I tell recruiters. So my focus is, now just to give everyone a sense, I've written a book, my 4th or 5th book, I can't remember right now, is called The Essential Guide for Hiring and Getting Hired. It's an adaptation of a couple of books I did, which are called Hire with Your Head, but I wanted to do another edition where I also gave candidates advice if the hiring manager or recruiters didn't interview properly. So it's a good book, but it's called The Essential Guide for Hiring and Getting Hired. It's on Amazon. It's pretty inexpensive, but it's a worthy investment. The time in doing it, but it'd be invaluable. But most of my work is involved in training recruiters now, but I've talked to thousands of candidates, and I want my candidates to do a good job. So I prep hundreds, if not thousands, of candidates on how to conduct an interview. So I want to share something with everybody. This slide. Let's see if I can open it up to the screen, and you can tell me if you're seeing a real slide here. Right, can you guys see that, Garrett?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so this is what I tell recruiters. I learned this, my first job when I got an MBA, my first management job, I think it was 25 or 26. I got transferred to Michigan from Southern California, but I was made a manager. And 3 days later, I was put on the MBA corporate recruiting program. They had to go down to Ann Arbor, University of Michigan, to recruit MBAs. And I had never interviewed, I had interviewed a few candidates, I guess, but I was now recruiting candidates around the country. But I was a line manager on budgeting and planning and capital investment analysis. But this is what my boss said, and we were going head to head with the hot companies at the time, IBM, Procter & Gamble, Ford, and we were Rockwell Automotive doing axles and gearboxes and off-road transmissions. It was really kind of a non-glamorous job. But I sat in on one interview with my boss, Chuck, and we're talking to candidates. And he said, you're going to do this for all the other 10 candidates you have. We had about 20 people wanted to come. And we said, time is your most valuable asset. And the best time to change jobs is when growth flattens. The worst time is waiting for things to get better. So the idea was being proactive. But all these were students going to University of Michigan, MBAs, and everyone was going after the hot ones. And we basically said there's often more risk in staying. And I say this to candidates who are actively employed too. So I'm not happy. I said, well, that's the best time to chat because you must be more discriminating. In fact, it might be more risk in staying. And then I show this chart. I said, when you think about learning, when you first take a job, the first year or two is great. You're really learning, you're growing fast, you're making a big impact, but then growth flattens down. So the ideal time to change jobs is just as the growth starts flattening. And maybe you can do that internally, maybe you can do it externally. But if you can't find that internal opportunity, then you do have to say, okay, I've got to reach out. And even if you're happy where you are. So let me kind of take this a little bit further. This gets a little complicated. The best time to change jobs is as soon as the growth flattens. Too many people wait. So the pitch we made to go against Rockwell or to go against Procter & Gamble and Ford and IBM, which were the hot companies at the time, was, hey, you can go to those big companies. The first year will be great. Then you're going to wait 2 to 3 years before you get promoted. At our company, you're going to get promoted probably a year and a half. I got my first promotion in 9 months after, of course, I had to take a relocation to Michigan, but it was well worth it after 9 months. My boss, Chuck, was this number 2 person in a $2 billion operation who was 28 years old. I was 26 years old. So it proved out to be true. We got every single candidate we targeted by that pitch. But it's a very valuable pitch. The idea is that if you change jobs, internally is best, but you can't just do it externally. It's a little bit harder, but it's certainly, and that's why mentorship is great because they're going to kind of push you forward. You can get 3 to 5 years experience in 1 to 2 years. That's how you build a career. Sometimes people in the learning zone is you don't want to change. If you're learning, you don't want to change. So I just give that generic advice. If you're learning and handling a big project, do it. The comfort zone is, hey, now I'm doing it. This job's pretty easy. I got it down. But then there's a danger zone if you do that too long. And that's you absolutely have to make a big risk to change jobs. And we look at people, they get in the danger zone pretty quickly. So my ideal candidate is someone here who's in the comfort zone, just getting ready to move. If they're at this level, they'll probably get picked up. They'll do it on their own or some mentor will pick them up. And sometimes if you waited too long, now your skills are history and you almost got to go back to school and start over again. But that's my idea of what a person, when the best time to change jobs is. Just as you move from the learning zone to the comfort zone, if you stay in the comfort zone too long, you get in the danger zone, and then people say, oh, you got too much, you're overqualified. And you could be overqualified. I look for people who are intrinsically motivated to do the work and have done it more recently. So even because someone can do the work doesn't mean they want to do it. So I'm looking for people who not only can do it, but have demonstrated that they're motivated to do that exact work in the last year or two. Then I say that's a good hire. So that's an interesting chart to use, and I think people should take a screenshot of this and kind of position where they are in their career at this point in time. Say, okay, when should I leave? When should I stay? Is the time right? And I think what you said, Garrett, is if you can do this internally, that's better. And if you have a mentor, that's even better because that person's going to help guide you along. And I had a couple mentors in my career which clearly guided me along. And Chuck, the guy who I moved out to Michigan with, was clearly a mentor. In fact, if he hadn't passed away at such an early age, we don't get into details of that, I wouldn't be doing what we're doing today. He had these cockamamie ideas. He said, Lou, you want to do this? Yeah, let's try it out. So, and I probably would have done some of the things he said, and it would have been a great ride, but it wouldn't have been this one.
Well, that's awesome. And just to be clear, when you say the danger zone, what are you potentially in danger of? Because
your skills are outdated. You've been doing the same thing. I mean, the learning zone 1 to 2 years, comfort zone 1 to 2 years, or maybe this could be a year and this could be another year. But you've been doing the same work 3 to 4 years. You're no longer current. It's comforting. It's not hard for you. You're not being stretched. If you're not getting better 10 to 15% every year, you're pushing into the danger zone. You've got to, I look for people who, even when people change jobs or how do they decide to change jobs, I understand, how did you get better? What did you do to improve yourself? Not only internally in the job, but also externally. And I'm looking for people who are motivated to get better. So if you're just going for the ride, you've got some skills and you're just going for the ride, You're not the kind of group that I'm going to go after, at least as a recruiter. I'm going looking for people who are trying to get better and improve themselves and are willing to stretch themselves and willing to take some career risk as well as job risk. But they clearly want to be people who want to get better. And that to me is the key that I look for when I look for talent.
That makes a lot of sense. That's fascinating. It makes me think a lot about Reid Hoffman. He's the guy that started LinkedIn. He has this thought process around tours of duty. Essentially what that means is when people are in the process of switching jobs, or they're contemplating essentially what the next steps are, what he does, at least as the founder of LinkedIn, is he would have everybody on a tour of duty. By that I just mean he would reach out to people and say, hey, by this XYZ date and time, it'd be maybe a year from then, or maybe 2 years from then, maybe 9 months, who knows, by XYZ date and time, something's gonna happen. Whether that means it's gonna be a promotion, whether that means it's gonna be a different work task, maybe it just means that we have a conversation, you continue on what you're doing. But what that does is it gives people clarity of something's gonna happen next, and that something's gonna change, something's gonna happen. It gives you something to work towards. And I think that very much aligns with what you're saying, in the sense that I feel like often companies will just have their annual check-ins and that's it. And there needs to be more than just that to keep people growing.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I totally 100% support it. It makes perfect sense. I like the metaphor to the tour of duty. I think the issue then, I would say, back to your main topic here, when you change jobs, if your company doesn't feel that way, if the culture isn't that we're going to put you in these situations, or the circumstances, even if they don't advocate it vocally, but if you don't see that that's what they want to do with people, and it's not changing fast enough, that would be a situation, hey, I'm going to be, even though you still might be in the learning zone or the comfort zone, you can just see that things aren't going to change. Yeah, you got to get out of there. That's not a culture you want to be in. What you just described, Garrett, about Reid Hoffman, that makes perfect sense. Is, hey, I don't know what's going on here, but this company's changing. People are getting in there. If I was someone in the workforce, I'd proactively seek out those opportunities and get a different tour of duty. And it's better to do that internally.
Yeah. And speaking of culture, this is another good question, because I think there's a lot of people out there that are thinking to themselves like, oh man, am I in the danger zone? Am I in the comfort zone? Like, what zone am I in? Like, how long have I been at this company? And I think there's probably a lot of people that might be sitting and having like a reality check right now, thinking to themselves like, I'm at my company for like 7 years, and I'm very much potentially in the danger zone. So I think, speaking of culture, how do you know when the culture is toxic?
Well, I don't know that that's a hard question to say, or a hard question to answer. Easy one to ask, though. When I look at culture, and as an outsider, I use a couple of proxies for culture. One of them is the rate of change of growth. If you're growing fast, that's one culture, and you can't change that no matter what your value systems are. Another part of the culture is how decisions are made. If you're growing fast and decisions are made on the fly quickly with limited data, that's another cold dimension of culture. On the other hand, if you're going slow and decisions are slow, now you can be growing in a bigger company, but decisions are still made with a small group of people making major decisions. That's an interesting piece of the culture. But the dominant component of the culture is really your boss. I mean, I loved the work I was doing. I was running a little manufacturing company. I was on a good track. I didn't want to leave. I liked it. I didn't like my boss. My boss's boss and the chairman of the company all wanted me to stay. I couldn't deal with this guy. And I gave him 4 chances. I was 32, so probably a little wild and crazy at the time. But I couldn't. So in my mind, I loved the culture of the company, the values, the way the company was run. I didn't like my boss, and that represented 80% of the culture. So what could I do? I had to get out of the culture. So that to me was the toxic culture, was the boss. I think companies are political, some companies, and that's certainly part of it too. So you've got to kind of define what is comfortable for you. If you're uncomfortable in that situation and can't make progress and can't proactively develop your career there, irrespective of where you're on this curve, you got to say, I got to get out of it. On the other hand, if someone says they're willing to suck it up and be in the danger zone, well, expect that you're going to be in there forever. And I tell candidates when I call them up, whatever you do in the next 1 to 2 years will affect the next 5 to 10. You got to evaluate it based on what you can be doing in the next 1 to 2 years. You're going to be put on a better curve, or you're going to be put in a situation where you can be doing the same thing for 5 to 10 years. So that's a decision people have to make, and your culture is a key part of it.
Yeah. And then, if you sit in that danger zone for 5 to 10 years, and then all of a sudden a recession happens, or the company determines that your job is obsolete, you get laid off, and you've got little prospects because you've been doing the same thing over and over and over again. And now the work landscape has changed. So yeah, I mean, definitely potentially a real outcome that could happen if you're sitting in that stagnant danger zone.
No question about it. So that's the idea. I mean, so the idea, just from a generic standpoint, where am I in this zone? Does it make sense from a time standpoint to change? Can I make that change internally or externally? And those are decisions you have to make, but they're all critical decisions. But then you got to look back on what's the best way to make that change, and how am I going to market myself, which is a whole another category of issues. How do you change it? What do you do to change jobs, as opposed to should I change jobs?
Do you have a methodology around determining whether you've got a bad boss? I mean, I know that might sound like an odd question to ask, because I think for some people it's obvious, like, this person I hate, they're just frustrating me. But I think that there might be a fine balance, because I see oftentimes I'll see people, they'll be in their work and it's almost like Stockholm syndrome. They know they don't like their boss, but they empathize with their boss, or they stay with their captor. Or on the flip side, it's just a transition into maybe a role. I see it sometimes with a lot of recent graduates. They'll get into that role and they face a lot of adversity, in the sense that there's a transition between college and career. And they're trying to understand that maybe their boss isn't being a jerk. It's just they have an expectation that maybe you didn't have set properly for you when you first got into the job. So yeah, the question is, how do you determine whether or not you've got a bad boss?
Okay, it could be your fault. I mean, maybe the boss has got a crappy employee. So, I mean, I don't want to just put it all on the boss. You might just be a jerk, and so be it. That's the way life is. So I think it's got to be a mutual decision of, have I screwed up? So when I look at people and they keep on telling me, hey, it's the boss's fault. No, it's your fault. You don't deliver goods on time. You're not responsible. Your work quality is low. So you're the problem, not the boss is the problem. Now, I know that sounds superficial and trite, but it could be both ways. So I'd say it's probably going to be 50-50. But there's a book that I would ask people to look at to get at your specific question, Garrett. There's a book that the Adler Group put out about 20 years ago. It's called First Break All the Rules, What the World's Best Managers Do Differently. And it's called the Q12. And you can look up the Q12 right now, and it goes in, here's the things that drive employee satisfaction. Clarifying expectations, having an opportunity to do work you like to do, working with a team, getting the resources to do your work, and a boss who develops and promotes you. I mean, it clearly says what a good boss is. So you could categorize yourself as your boss based on that criteria. And that also is a criteria you should use, is should I stay or should I leave? Am I getting these things that I want? I think that would mimic pretty closely to that, the learning zone, comfort zone, danger zone situations of where am I in my career? Is it my fault? Is it my boss's fault? Is it the company's fault? As far as I'm concerned, the person has to take personal responsibility for making it happen. I remember I was just telling a story last week. Somebody said, how do you get from manufacturing or from engineering to finance and accounting? Because I was director of financial planning for a company. Then I wanted to get into operations. They said, how'd you pull that off? And I went to my boss, who's this guy who's turned out to be the jerk. And I said, I want to be the director of supply chain for that company. He said, you have no business doing that. I said, well, I could learn it. What do I have to learn to do that? I just said it. He said, you got to get APIC certified, which is American Production Inventory Control Society. So I didn't know what that was. So I read the book. I literally read the book at a conference. I went to the conference, and 3 weeks later, I got certified. Did nothing what I was doing. And everyone, I said, I got the job. Probably didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I got it anyway. I proactively took my own career. I didn't let someone else determine it. I did it for myself. And I think that's a thing that I look for in candidates. What have you done to proactively develop and get better? Don't wait for something to happen and complain about it. Do something about it. And that, to me, is the tipping point here. If you've got to wait all these times to make the decision, hey, it's probably going to continue to wait. And if you got to agonize over even deciding where you are in the zone, it's probably too late. I know that sounds caustic and sad, but hey, take action. Proactively develop yourself and go after it. These are just guide rules to do it, but the key is, hey, I've always wanted to be better. Well, go get better. And that, to me, is the guidance. It's kick you in the butt process and go do it, and you'll discover that, hey, it's probably not as hard as you think it is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that leads to the next point of how did you determine that? Like, how did you determine that was the next step for you? I feel like I speak with a lot of people, maybe they're in their 30s or 40s or 50s, and they say to me, they say, Garrett, I want to make a total change. I don't know what change I want to make, but I want to make a total change. I want to have a total shift in what I'm doing. And often I feel like those preconceived notions, if you've got a preconceived notion about what a type of work will do for you, a lot of times it doesn't work out the way you think. I think it kind of falls along the lines of, I think, what is the saying? Like, if you find Buddha, kill him, because like he can't possibly live up to the expectations you have for him. The idea is like, if you've got a preconceived notion that some field is super glamorous or amazing or fantastic, and then when you get into it, it's going to be difficult to meet those expectations. And oftentimes, kind of with that point is, I see a lot of people that will switch jobs into something that maybe isn't so glamorous, or they don't even realize it's glamorous, and ends up becoming a great opportunity for them. So I guess the point is how can you go about, what do you suggest for those types of people that think, I want to make a big career switch, a big change? How do I find what I desire, and how do I know if that's actually the right fit for me? Because I think growth can come in so many forms and fashions.
That's actually a very complicated question, and I don't want to give a superficial, glib answer. But I would make the generic statement is 5 or 10 or 15 or 20% change is reasonable and logical. 50 to 100% change is illogical. Change industry, change management, change role, you're just not qualified to do it. Nobody would hire you anyway, unless you want to just start your own business, and that's high risk. So let's take that off the table. So the idea is incremental change is appropriate. I want to just see, and I'm not positive it's here, so I'm going to see if I can find this other slide, because I think, it could very well be that it's not in this deck because this is not my candidate deck, but I call it the job hunting syndrome. And I got to see if it's here. If not, you can cut this part out. And I don't think I have it here, so.
No worries. And I think this, by the way, is a good moment just for our audience viewing. I'd love to ask you, audience, what are the most important factors to you when it comes to your work? So what are the things that are important to you? What are the things that you've considered? What are the things that you're contemplating? What is important to you? I'd love to learn about it. Share it in the comment section.
Yeah, I can't find it, so let's just skip it.
Okay. So one question that I have.
Let me describe what I was saying. So let me kind of just assume that you've asked a question, and I'm just going to link into what I said.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to what I said about short-term decision-making and long-term decision-making. And this concept I call job hunting syndrome. I can contend that too many people leave jobs for short-term reasons, not intrinsic reasons. Now, if you leave a job because you're not growing, you're not developing, that's fine. But if you leave it for short-term issues like, I don't like the boss, or frequently, I don't like the drive, it's what we call short-term inconveniences. Yes, I know they're a pain and they can build up, but I ask that, why did you leave your last job? And I'm hoping that it's for a long-term career reason. I said, well, why did you take your new job? And most people would say it's long-term career reasons, but reality is it's short-term. Location was closer, the comp was better, the title was better, whatever. It was the stuff that they got on day one. Then the next question is, well, did you get what you wanted out of that? And then the excuse is, no, I was misled. Well, really, being misled 2 or 3 times means that's your criteria for deciding. So my decision is focus on the long term. Don't get stuck into job hunting syndrome, which is your point, Garrett. As soon as you take the new job, it's not as glamorous as you thought, and you go back to being disappointed and you leave again. So then you get sucked in this vicious cycle of job hunting and disappointment. If you focus on the long-term criteria, is what work am I going to be doing? Is this work satisfying to me? Is this work intrinsically motivating to me that I want to do? And does it put me on the right career path? That's the decision you have to make. And that's not an easy decision to make, because most times companies don't do it. That's why you go back to the Q12, it says, what drives employee satisfaction? You'll see them listed there. You start thinking about, how do you make the decisions? Are they leaving for short-term reasons or long-term reasons? Are they accepted for long-term reasons or short-term reasons? I want people to change jobs. Changing jobs is important. So change them for the right reasons. Every person has different reasons for changing jobs at different parts in their life. And you said it, when you're 30 or 40 and you have kids, it's a different reason when you're 22 or 20 something. And when you're 40 something, it's hard to change it 40 or 50 something unless you got lots of money and you want to take a big risk. So each of those factors take into place, and there's a lot of variables, but I stay focused on, and I said this to a candidate, it's gotta be 35 years ago now. The candidate was going to take a job from me for a manufacturing or an operations manager spot. And I had a spot for him as a plant manager for a company that was at the time high-tech electronics, and he was going for commodity components or something. And I was very disappointed because he didn't want to take the job. And I really lost the fee. I mean, it was very disappointing. And I was almost struggling. The candidate said, John said to me, he said, Lou, I'm going to take this other job. And I was depressed. But I got over it after about 5 minutes. We were just talking. And I said this to him. I said, John, you're about to make a long-term decision using short-term information. He said, what do you mean by that? I said, John, everything you said to me, the location, the title, the comp, the company itself, was everything you're going to be doing on day one. But you're going to be in an industry that's a dying industry. My job, yes, a little bit further drive, a little less pay, title isn't as good, but you're in a high-tech industry that's growing. I said, have you made the decision yet? And he said, no, I haven't, but I'm ready to call the company. I said, can you delay that till tomorrow? He said, I don't know, but I'll try. And I'm sitting here, and I was a contingency recruiter, which means you only get paid if the candidate takes the job. And it was a big fee. Plant manager, equivalent to probably 175K today. Certainly wasn't that much those days, but you multiply that by 30% fee, that's a lot of money. A lot of money today and a lot of money then. He calls me up the next morning. He said, Lou, I couldn't sleep at all last night. You just hit me over the head with that long-term decision using short-term data. I'm going to take your offer, which was a plant manager in a high-tech company. A year later, John called me and said, Lou, thank you so much. I've just been made VP operations for the whole western coast of the United States. We're building a bunch of technology plants in China. Best decision I ever made. That's the advice that I tell every candidate. Don't make long-term strategic decisions using short-term tactical information. It's hard to sometimes get the information, but if you follow that rule, your career will be on a faster track than it would be otherwise.
That's a really good perspective. I think a lot of times we downplay that component of, and that thought process, that notion that should I go for something that I see as the future of work or something that's going to compensate me right now? I think that point you make of long-term goals, the future of where you think work is going, whether that be technology or wherever you think the work is growing, that is crucial. And that's something that's going to land you opportunities because that industry is going to grow if you believe it's going to grow. So I like that perspective on that. My next question is, when it comes to...
This has got to be your last question because I do have to get ready for another meeting that I've got in a few minutes.
Yeah, I think my last question, this is a good thing to wrap up on, is how do I assess the cost of switching jobs? How do I assess, how much pain is it going to incur to me to uproot whatever I'm doing right now to go and make a switch? How do I assess that cost?
Well, I don't know if it's a cost, but here's a way I would look at it. And I have built this into our recruiter training and hiring manager training is, don't let candidates make long-term decisions using short-term data. So I just have a little grid. I said, let's put everything down of comparing your current job to offer A, opportunity B, and opportunity C, and balance it in, what do I get on day one? What am I going to be doing in year one? What could I become? Now, obviously, what you could become is a variable based on the company growth and the opportunities and the company culture and the industry it's in. But what you're doing, you should get that information from the hiring manager. Hey, tell me what's some of the projects I'm going to be handling, and what do I get on the start date? And then to compare it. In my mind, the cost should be is you should value what you're doing and becoming greater than what you get on the start date. Now, obviously, if you're and then you just got to balance all of that. You can't do discounted cash flow kind of thing, but you can certainly look at all of those things. But I tell candidates and their advisors is don't focus on just what you get on the start date. And the candidate's advisors, spouse, family, friends, coworkers, all will say, hey, what's the money, honey? Most advisors will focus on the short term. You, the candidate, have to focus on the midterm, what you're going to be doing in year one or where you could go, and who the people you're going to be working with. If that's the right group of people, the right company in the right industry, and the job makes career sense, there's no cost to that. The cost is overvaluing what you get on the start date. And it's hard to make that decision, because what you get on the start date is a relief of pain. I get this, I don't have to drive this far. But relief of pain is short-lived, because you might put yourself into more pain and then you can't change again. And now you put yourself in this vicious cycle. So it's a great question, hard one to answer, but I think if you take that balanced approach and compare jobs across that way, that'll be the right decision. But it's fundamentally aligned by the fact, don't make strategic decisions using tactical information.
Lou, thank you. This advice has been excellent. I think the big consistent theme here, don't make career changes based on short-term data. Go for the long term. Think about where you want your career to be. Think about what you want, how you want your career to compensate you in non-financial means. That is what you should be focusing on. If there's not at least a 30% increase in an increase in non-financial compensation, whether it means opportunities for growth, title, that sort of stuff, then it is not the right time to switch. So the time to switch is when the right opportunity is there. But also, I think at the same time, there's two things to balance out. Your frustration with your current work, which that would definitely motivate time to switch, but also the opportunities that exist out there. And I think what we don't want to get caught in is in that danger zone that Lou was talking about. Because if we get caught in that danger zone because we're complacent, we're like, hey, I'm happy, I'm comfortable, I don't want to uproot things, we could become obsolete. So if you're thinking about switching jobs, if it's on the plate, or if you've just been in a job for quite a while, it might make sense to consider that transition and what next steps might mean. Lou, thank you for your time. I'm really grateful to have you on the Ambition and Motion workshops. I'm excited to learn the audience feedback and any questions they may have. Lou, if for anybody in the audience that might be viewing and they might want to reach out to you, or maybe pick your brain, or just like get connected with you, is there any way that they could find you, any books that you're writing, any things that you have going on in your world?
Sure. Well, I'll give three. I mean, number one, you can certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm right there. Follow me on LinkedIn. I do post a couple times a week. Certainly you can go to Amazon and look up Essential Guide for Hiring and Getting Hired. And certainly you can go to performancebasedhiring.com and see a whole host of articles we have. Join the library. You can look up the Job Seeker series of articles. You'll find a lot of stuff there. So you do those things, at least you're aware of how to make the process as logical as possible. And but it is still an uphill battle, because most of the people you'll be talking with won't have the information you need to make a complete decision. But that's part of what you have to do. Sometimes you have to make a decision with incomplete information. And let me end it with this point. The title of my first book was Hire With Your Head, A Rational Way to Make a Gut Decision. And it was geared to hiring managers making the decision. It's the same is true for candidates. A rational way to make a gut decision. You'll never have all the information, but you have to have the right information. I would emphasize the long term over what you get on day one. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you, Lou.